Welcome, everyone. Well, it's Tuesday, April the 21st, and you are now logging into Deeper Insights, our Tech Canada daily webinar series. On the screen, you're going to see some of the up-and-coming presenters that we'll have both through the end of this week and into next week. So I would encourage you to make sure that you log in, find out what you need to know to help you get through some of this, as well as do some great education and learning tools. All of the webinars that we have previously done have been recorded and are on our Tech Canada website. So when you go to our website, you'll see COVID-19 Insights. It's a yellow tab at the very top. Click on that, you'll see a drop down. The one says resources and the second says webinars. So you'll see all of the recordings there for you. Today you are in listen only mode, but we want to encourage your participation. So you will see that the chat box, or pardon me, the question box is there for you. I'd like you to type in your questions and comments as we go through the presentation. And I know that Jim has built out the presentation so that we can have several points in it that we'll be able to talk to you and have you talk to us about what you're hearing. Jim Harris is an author of several books. The Learning Paradox was nominated for the National Business Book Award and has appeared on numerous bestsellers. He is also, his most recent book, Blindsided, was published in 80 countries worldwide and is also a #1 international bestseller and hit the top spot on the Financial Times of London's European edition of Best Business Books. Jim is also one of Tech Canada and Vistage's top speakers. He won a Speaker of the Year award just a few years back and has been very, very engaged with all of our groups nationally in presenting his great content. So without further ado, Jim Harris, I'm turning it over to you now.
Thank you so much, Ruth Ann. I just have to correct you on one thing. I didn't win Tech Speaker of the Year. I would love to have won Tech Speaker of the Year.
Well, maybe I'm letting the cat out of the bag.
Maybe I'm going to win it this year. Anyways, it is so great to be here, and what an amazing thing tech is doing by having this incredible daily lineup of people bringing incredible value to not just tech members, but you've opened this up to the public. And on Friday, Jean McClellan of PwC is going to be walking everyone through the government programs. It's a repeat return demand session. So if you're interested in that, tune in. If anybody wants to reach me at any point, it's just jim@jimharris.com. I'm on LinkedIn. By all means, send a connection request. And if you're tweeting about this today, my handle is just @JimHarris. We're going to be looking at how COVID-19 is really accelerating digital transformation. And I'm going to speak for about 10 minutes and then allow for Q&A and interaction, then go back, speak for 10 minutes again, and allow it again. And we're going to do that 3 or 4 times today. This cartoon by Tom Fishburne really summarizes what's happening for me. Digital transformation is years away. I don't see our company having to change soon, and COVID just slamming in. We're going to come back to this as a theme time and time again as we go through the seminar today. Just love Market Tunes and Tom's work. Really, the toothpaste is out of the tube, and we're not going to get it back in. This tiny little virus of 0.2 microns has thrown a complete disruption into global markets and the economy. We're going to look at the cascading implications of this: technology, innovation, and personal and leadership. These are the 4 areas we're going to focus on today. So this blows me away. In December of 2019, there were 10 million daily users on Zoom. In March, that had spiked to 200 million. So my question is, how many companies have experienced a 20x growth in customer count as a result of this crisis? And my central thesis today is companies that have made the transition to digital transformation are thriving, and those that have resisted it are being crushed. And digital transformation, we'll make a distinction internally, how we use it inside our company, and externally, how we use it with customers or suppliers. Do you know that the average North American spends 5 work weeks a year in traffic jams commuting? 200 hours a year. And many companies had a policy that prevented people from working from home before COVID. Now they're being forced to let people work from home, and they're going to find out that people do a great job. So what's going to happen is things will never go back to the way they were beforehand. Because when we all start working at the office again, people are going to say, I want to work from home for 2 days or 3 days. And I can't, it's insane to waste 5 weeks a year in traffic jams. So if I work from home for 2 or 3 days a week and my spouse does as well, and we alternate it, think about this. 70 million US households have 2 cars or more. All of a sudden, we're going to say, we don't need that second car. What are the implications for the auto industry? We're going to let go of the second car, and we're going to use Lyft and Uber if we really get into a pinch. So that's a pretty profound implication for automakers. What about commercial real estate? Companies are going to realize, hey, rather than have this hugely expensive real estate in the downtown financial core, why don't we cut our office space in half? People can hotel, just like I book a hotel when I come to Calgary, and boom, millions of dollars directly going to the bottom line every single year. So what are the cascading implications for commercial real estate? I did the market valuations yesterday. Amazon is worth $1.2 trillion. You can take these 8 other retailers, add them up, and you can almost multiply by 3, and you get Amazon's value. The only retailers that are doing well right now are grocery retailers in the physical space. Every other retailer is being crushed because they are forced to be closed. Amazon was busy hiring 100,000 people because they can't keep up with it. And then they realized the 100,000 more people wasn't enough. They're now hiring another 75,000 people. So how many companies have had to expand by almost 200,000 people during this crisis? The point I'm trying to make is if you made the transition to digital before this crisis, you're actually thriving. 16.3% of all retail sales in the US were by e-commerce. That number is going to explode as a result of this crisis. We used to say that cash is king, but I really have to tell you, cash used to be king. Cash is so 2019 because China went and washed every single piece of currency in order to strip the virus off the currency. And we're going to see going forward the death of cash, which means we're going to see the rise of Square and Venmo and PayPal and Bitcoin and other alt currencies. So cash and financials are going to have a profound shift as a result of COVID. In Italy, there were a number of ventilators that had broken parts. This tiny part was broken. And so commercial and personal 3D printers were used to print the part that allowed the ventilators to operate and save lives. So we're going to see an incredible surge in 3D printing. And the interesting thing to note is that it's distributed. It's not one manufacturing facility. Every home that has a 3D printer can become a manufacturing facility. This is a 13-year-old in the Okotoks, and he took his 3D printer that he got as a Christmas present a year ago, and he decided to print 3D face masks for his local hospital. So he's been printing hundreds of them. The maker of the 3D printer released a blueprint that every single user of their 3D printer could print hospital PPE personal protection equipment for their local hospitals. This is really changing the game. Telehealth is going to be something that we're going to see an incredible rise of. This is Babylon Health by TELUS, and it's only available in BC and Alberta right now. But why do I actually have to go to a hospital, or why do I have to go to a doctor's office and sit in the room with other people who are sick, catching whatever they have, if I have an ache or a pain? Why can't I just, visit my doctor remotely? But jurisdictions have had barriers, legislative, regulatory barriers to telehealth. Well, this crisis is breaking those barriers apart. In China, this app has been downloaded by 300 million people. And during the COVID crisis in China, more than 50% of all medical visits were remote by telehealth. We can end up having devices at home, consumer devices. Like I bought oxygen monitor for your fingertip for $24 from Amazon, so that every morning Leanna and I can measure our oxygen levels. So we're going to see preventative health and telemedicine. In China, before COVID crisis, this was a video booth that you could go into and have a doctor's visit, and then right next to it was a pharmacy that you swipe your credit card and get whatever the most frequently prescribed medicines are. We have to think differently. Google and Apple, using our smartphones, could do contract tracing instantly with billions of people. So in other words, all this could be done automatically, but it's not the technology that's holding us back. It's the barriers in our minds. It's the regulatory barriers. But we will have to change given this pandemic. So I'm going to give you an exercise now. We're at the first 10 minutes, and I'm just going to summarize. So we've talked about Zoom growing its user base 20x, commuting, second car sales, mobility as a service like Uber and Lyft, the impact on commercial realty, office hoteling, e-commerce, the death of cash, 3D printing, telehealth, and contact tracing. So what I want to do is pause here for a minute or two, and I want everyone to think just for themselves, what are some of the implications for your company, for your industry? And as you think about those implications, type them into the chat function, and Ruth Ann will either read them out, or Ruth Ann, can people also ask a question by audio?
It would be a little bit awkward. We've got about 144 people online, so it's a bit of a,
so
yeah,
we'll,
I just
we'll
encourage
keep it
people
to
to type
chat.
in
So,
the question box. Question,
so
yeah.
what are some of the implications for your firm or your industry? And Ruth Ann will read some of those out as they come through.
So the first one that came in was from James, and it's massive online training has really bloomed everywhere.
So thank you, James, for that. I want to share with you a stat that blows me away. Companies do training and development, and do you know that 70% of the cost of training and development in traditional organizations is flying people from all over the country or the world to one location where they do training? 70% of the cost is flights, hotels, and food. What this COVID crisis is showing is, hey, we can get by really well and reduce the cost of T&D by 70%. So I have to commend Ruth Ann and Tech for doing what you're doing right here. We can have great educational seminars that are zero cost for travel. Now, the key is you can't just take something that's in person and put it online. We need to have far more interaction, and you can't have a sage on the stage for an hour talking. So yes, thank you for kicking us off with that, James. I predict that after this, things will never go back to the way they were, that companies are going to dedicate more of their resources to distance learning or e-learning or this kind of webinar that we're doing today. And, they'll be able to get 4 times more out of their training budget. We'll still have in person, but it'll only be, 50% of the budget, and this will be 50%, and we'll get 4 times more out of our training budget. Thank you, James. Is there another one?
Yeah, there's two sort of that back to back on each other. One from Colin, one from George, and they're really about outside sales with significantly reduced windshield time. The old sales paradigm and the models are going to change dramatically as we move forward into this. So sales being one, and hospitality, the reduction of interactive service and an increase in remote and digital. So some significant disruption in those two areas. Do you want to comment on those, Jim?
So for the in-person ones, I'm gonna save it. The second one I'm gonna save because I have something later that'll address this. And for the first one, yes, I've heard some companies already are thinking about a policy that there'll be no travel unless you have 2 meetings in another city. So I see a hybrid coming out, just like I talked about the hybrid for training and education. You end up having a number of web meetings, webinars, Zoom meetings with your prospect in another city. You involve their technical people, their financial people, with your financial people, your technical people, and you move the sale along maybe 50% of the way virtually before you ever meet in person. And then if you absolutely have to, you have an in-person meeting. So yes, I agree with you. It is going to change the sales process. So let's back to the material, and we're going to do another 10-minute block.
I'm gonna,
And then,
Jim,
sorry,
can
go
I just
ahead,
pop
Ruth
this
Ann.
one in?
Yeah, please
Yeah,
do.
this one sort of caught me by surprise, and maybe it'll come up later. But Joey wrote in, Callan Ice Sports, it's their esports is already blowing up and moving at a faster clip. What's going to be the disruption that's going to happen between esports and traditional sports? And maybe I'll just leave it there.
Oh, well, that's great. And I've worked with Canlin. It's a great group. Joey's a great guy, the CEO. Yes, esports are, as you say, blowing up. Like esports are a multi-billion-dollar industry, and led by platforms like Twitch and games like Fortnite. And it's incredible. So yes, all of a sudden if you used to have an arena that was used only for a skating rink, it could be a venue for a huge esport event. Although today, of course, with social distancing, we can't use a physical arena. So yes, this notion of pivoting is exactly what we're getting at in what we're talking about here. We'll come back to that perhaps with an elaboration in our next question. So I'm going to go back to the material. Anybody who's enjoying this is a cover article that I wrote for a magazine called Disruption Magazine. The story was on how autonomous vehicles and artificial intelligence are going to kill driving. And I don't know, looking at this cover, they sent a professional photographer to our office to take 300 photos of, and this is the one they picked. Ruth Ann, do you think I A, look sinister, B, evil, like Dr. Evil, or C, demonic?
I'm not going to wade into that, but definitely that does not look like you, Jim.
Ruthann, I think my career as a runway model is like over before it began.
People are
Anyways,
weighing in. They're all saying C, though, demonic.
demonic. So if you want to get a copy of this article, just email me afterwards, jim@jimharris.com, or even better yet, connect to me on LinkedIn and I'll send you the links to download this 2,000-word article for free. So I want to touch on some exponential trends, and my email again, jim@jimharris.com. So this is the classic exponential trend that we know of. This is Moore's law, where the processor power on the CPU doubles every 18 months while staying at the same price point. So way back in the early 70s, there were 2,000 transistors on a CPU, and today it is 40 billion transistors. You know, it is incredible the growth that we have seen. So what does that mean practically? Well, a gigaflop is a measure of compute speed, and a gigaflop is doing 1 billion transactions or operations in a single second. And in 1961, a gigaflop cost $153 billion on mainframes. And in 2019, it was 1 cent. And that's like so 2019 a figure. It's going down, Ruthann. It's going down to half that. So basically, compute power is free and it's at the edge. And what does at the edge mean? It's on my smartphone. My smartphone has more raw computing power than IBM's Deep Blue, which was a supercomputer that beat Garry Kasparov in chess in '97. So just 20 years later, I have a supercomputer, then it was worth $100 million, in my hip pocket for 1,000. And that is changing every business. So here are just some exponential trends. We're not going to go through all of them, but there are more than a dozen trends that are all exponentially improving in a price performance basis. And this very last one at the bottom right, I'm going to take drones, and we're going to look at that, how it's impacting different businesses. So drones are going to create $100 billion of value in it by 2024. So first off, the plummeting price. In 2007, a drone was $100,000. You could only get it if you were the military. By 2013, $700, and today you can get a consumer drone for less than $100. Look at the huge decline in cost, the huge demonetization in this space. And the applications that these are being used for are going to surprise you. Not only are drones cheaper, they're lighter, faster, smaller, longer range, more versatile, and way more accurate. So Barclays Capital predicts that drones will create $100 billion of new value for businesses, and in ways that you would never expect. LAPD spent $5.1 million to buy this helicopter. But if you're a poor police department in the Midwest, you don't have a spare $5.1 million. But for a $1,000 high-end drone, you can surveil your geography and see from the air what's going on. So think about, instead of having to spend 5.1 million, you only have to spend 1,000. That is hugely deflationary. Drones are being used for land surveying. So in the construction industry, in roadworks, they're also being used in agriculture. So you can put on a drone infrared or thermal sensing, and you can, this is the same field with 3 different lenses. The first is looking at vegetable density. The second in the middle is looking at water deficit. And the third on the right is looking at crop stress. So I can see in the middle one exactly where the hot spots are, where my crops need watering. And rather than water everything, I just water what is needed. Do you know that 70% of fresh water globally is used for agriculture? And this is called precision farming, which allows me to reduce water usage by 70%. And with the crop stress, I can see if there's a pest infestation. The cameras on drones are so good, I can see what pest is stressing my crop or whether it's a fungus. Drones are being used by electric utilities and construction firms. So here we can inspect the lines without having to have scaffolding and linemen getting electrocuted by accident and falling off the scaffolding. So think about the increased safety, the reduced cost, the increased speed of being able to inspect after a storm. Same thing for bridges and balconies in construction. Drones are being used for insurance, so the claims adjuster doesn't have to go out and visit every property physically. The drone can tell you pretty quickly. You can see with video and images just whether this building is a write-off or not. Of course, Hollywood has used drones for filming, greatly in enhancing the shots they can take while also reducing the cost. And this one is surprising. The majority of the population in the world live in cities that are so crowded with traffic. Remember that 5 weeks commuting. Hospitals are now transferring really time-sensitive human organs for transplant by drones between hospitals in the same city. McKinsey and Company, the management consulting firm, says that autonomous vehicles and drones will deliver 100% of B2C deliveries in the very near future. And Amazon already in 2016 delivered its first package in the United Kingdom. It's called Prime Air, and it went from the distribution center to the person who ordered it in less than 30 minutes. You just go out and put a QR code on your lawn, it tells it where to land, it drops the package off and takes off. So this goes back to Amazon's focus on ease of use and convenience. And during this COVID crisis, people are being forced to use Amazon and online services because they can go to the grocery store, but every other store is closed. And it's going to introduce millions upon millions upon millions of consumers to the ease and convenience of online shopping and Amazon Prime. So Amazon's stock value has gone up during this COVID crisis. This is Domino's Pizza in London, England, the UK, and they deliver in London about 600,000 pizzas a year, but it takes 25 minutes. Look over here on the right. By drone, I can cut that time into 6 minutes from 25 and at half the price. So faster pizza, less cost. This is really going to take off. UPS has just got licensed to have its own airline of drones under an FAA Part 135 license. And FedEx is using ground-based drones like this to deliver packages the last mile in the city. And don't think either or, it's going to be an and. Imagine a truck, a UPS truck that's driving around that has 10 of these delivery drones, and the drivers in the thing sending them out, and they all then drop off their packages. They make sure you're home first, and then they come back. So here are some of the trends that are exponentially compounding the price performance of drones. So each one of these 6 lines is exponentially improving. So GPS is exponentially improving. Compute power, we've already see is basically free. Batteries are not only getting lighter, they're having higher energy density. Digital imaging, both cameras and video, radically improving every single year. 5G will have pinpoint accuracy and AI edge chips. And I'm going to just take this one trend as it applies to drones and look at it. I was at the Consumer Electronics Show in January in Vegas, and these won an innovation award. This is the front and back of an AI edge chip that is the smallest AI chip in the world. It's the lightest and the lowest power. In fact, it's so tiny that it can go into a little hearing aid. But let's go back to the agricultural example. Now we can have AI edge chips in drones going around doing pattern recognition on the final panel here of crop stress, identifying with the high resolution camera on the drone and the AI chip what pest it is and what the percentage of infestation is for this crop area. So the applications of drones, compute power, AI, GPS, all are radically changing the proposition or the value proposition for drones use in agriculture and all these other industries. So this is the brace that my father had and used when he was young. Dad's dead now, but I still have this brace. We now consider it an antique, but this is how you used to drill a hole in wood back when my father was growing up during the Depression. And when electrification came along, all the companies that made braces went bankrupt. Why? Because they didn't electrify. And the same is true about AI, artificial intelligence. Every single company, every single industry is going to need to embrace AI because it's going to have a profound impact on the business and the bottom line. So the question I want to ask you, and I'll flip to the next slide, how might one of these technologies impact your industry? We're going to pause again here, Ruth Ann, and see people can type in comments. So how might just one of these technologies impact your industry? So here are the technologies we talked about: Moore's Law, which is processing power, smartphones, bandwidth, which is 5G, artificial intelligence, cloud computing, hard disk storage. Really, we should say we don't need hard disk storage as much because we have cloud storage. Big data, Internet of Things, virtual reality, augmented reality, the speed of change, solar power, battery costs, 3D printing, crowdsourcing, blockchain and crypto, cyber attacks, lighting costs, and drones. So here are more than a dozen trends. Pick any one of these trends and think about how it's going to impact your business. So I'm going to give you a minute to think about this, and we're going to take the insights from Ruth Ann as you type them into the chat function.
One of the things that's come in, Jim, and I think that this is really critical too, is understanding and differentiating how the technology impacts. So AI would not replace agents and brokers, but agents and brokers who use AI will replace those that don't. This comes in from Jeff.
I would agree with that. So uh, I have been working with my bank for, well, let's see, it'd be about 40 years, I guess. And so 40 years I have been working with my bank. And when I go in, they make me fill out a form. Like, they've been dealing with me for 40 years. Don't they know me? So how do we take repetitive non-value added tasks out of process using either AI or some automation process so that the important work is done human to human? That's empathy. You know, a machine can't be empathetic. That's what we need the people for. So how do we use technology to remove every non-value added step? What do your customers hate about dealing with your processes, and how do we automate those? So I would agree, brokers with AI are going to far outperform brokers who don't use AI. And so I have to tell this story, Ruth Ann. It's just so fun. I was working with brokers from all across Canada, and at a national conference of an insurer. And one of the brokers that I was interviewing on the brokers panel was from St. Catharines, and you know, down by Welland, Ontario. And he wanted to get into AI and he wanted to hire a data scientist. And you think, what data scientist is going to want to move to Welland? You know, they all get $250,000. They go work for Google. Anyways, he got a recent grad on a work placement and then hired him when he graduated. And they studied their call pattern. And you know what? The AI data scientist came up with some amazing things. The number one time people called into the brokerage was during lunch hour. The number one time there was nobody available to answer the phone was lunch hour. Everybody was taking their lunch. So, why do we need to hire a data scientist to figure out some of this rocket science here? Anyways, so what they did is they said nobody can take lunch from 11:30 to 1:30. That is when it's all hands on deck, because that's when our call volumes are the highest, and if we believe we want to serve our customer. So AI can unearth some very low-hanging fruit before you even get into segmenting our client base and slicing and dicing offerings. So even there are so much low-hanging fruit on AI 101. So another question, Ruthann?
So you've touched on a couple of parts. I mean, most of it has to do with AI and being integral to performance management, but the data collection is also really critical in informing us as to where we need to make innovations in practice, whether it be interpersonally. So some people have talked about coaching, about training, about access to time training nuggets that would be delivered to your phone. AI use for product development, that comes from Stan. So AI really seems to be the tool of choice right now.
Yes, and AI is getting democratized. Just like I used to use Unix. The internet has existed for a lot longer than the web has. The big shift came in '93 when the web was made easy to use with a graphical user interface with Mosaic and then Netscape, then IE. And in the same way, AI is getting easier to use. Like IBM has its Watson, but we're going to see it broken down and made easier and easier for end users to use. This has been great. I'm going to go back to the material. I'm going to look at a little bit at innovation. So I was at a conference in Kananaskis, which is in the Rockies in Alberta. We are so blessed to live in such a beautiful country. And we had so much fun. We rock and rolled so much that the gang invited me back the next year. And at a dinner before the event began, Jeff came up to me and he said, "Jim, I just have to tell you what happened in the intervening year. You told us to think differently. You exhorted us to focus on innovation. You told us to consult with our millennials, and you used the example of Airbnb in your presentations and said we have to think about different business models." So I wanted to expand into the US, and the way I would have normally done it would have been a $15 million design build facility. Jeff's company is called Altameda, and they make these helixical pilings. They're like screws that go into the ground pre-construction of a tall building. So he said, I would normally have built a $15 million building, but you exhorted me to consult with my millennials and think differently and use different business models. So instead, the millennials said, what you should do is we should find a brand new building that has just been built that has a lot of excess capacity that isn't being used and rent it rather than build and buy and own it. And so that's what they did. They found a brand new facility that had overbuilt by 100% to allow for future expansion. They didn't need any of that space for the next 3 years. So Jeff was able to rent it pennies to the dollar. He was able to take what would have been a CapEx and turn it into an OpEx. He completely de-risked the expansion. He said, we've been cash flow positive from day one. We're making money. It's fantastic. And so I said, Jeff, what you're really saying is coming to this conference was worth $15 million to you. And he said, yeah, I guess that's one way of putting it. And so I said, Jeff, tonight you're buying my steak. So here's the thing. What we're talking about today, when you really begin applying it to think innovatively, is profound. If you stop people on the street and say, hey, what's innovation? What's innovative? People will answer this, the iPhone. It actually isn't. It was innovative in 07. There are other companies like, Huawei and Samsung that are far ahead of Apple on their product features, but 75% of the answers will be about a product. And similarly, in companies, 75% of the innovation effort is on product. But product is not the only type of innovation. While it gets 75% of the focus in companies, it only yields 10% of the value. 90% of the value is in these other 4 areas like business model innovation, process innovation. I'm only going to deal with 2 of these other 4 areas because we're in a short session today. So let's look to begin with at business model innovation. So here we have Uber versus taxis. I want to give you a staggering stat. Uber is worth more than every taxi cab company in North America added together. That blows me away. So while the taxi industry owns billions of dollars of assets, Uber doesn't own a single vehicle. So what does this teach me? One, it teaches me that an app is a huge multiplier of my business valuation. If I can get an app that is widely used, that is a huge increase in the value of my business. Now, it is disturbing to me that more than half of Canadian businesses don't have an app. Do you see a problem here? Now, what is the taxi cab company doing to respond? Well, in Toronto, Diamond Taxi is creating its own app for $250,000. Good for them. So is Bex Taxi, great. But do you know what? I'm not going to download 19 Toronto taxi apps and key my unique data into each one with my fat thumbs. No, the taxi industry doesn't get it that they have to work at a higher order. If the taxi industry developed one app, call it Global Taxi App, and all 19,000 cab companies worldwide participated, I would download that. But they're not thinking in the new way. Therefore, Uber is crushing them all. I'm so excited that Tech Canada has developed its own app, and 95% of tech groups are now using it. And it's so cool. I was working with Todd's group. Todd is the CEO of Tech Canada, and he still maintains a group, his CEO Tech Group. And I was working with it, and Tim, who's the CEO of Poeta is Digital, is in his tech group, and Poeta has done this app. So it is absolutely fantastic. And I would commend every single tech member and every single tech chair who's on this call to engage with the app as much as possible through your groups. Think about this. If we can deliver people from point A to point B with Uber, could we deliver burgers? Absolutely. It's called Uber Eats. And last year, Uber did $6 billion of business with Uber Eats. Now, I want to go backwards a step and say, hey, would you agree with me that the product of a taxi cab company and a Uber is the same in that it involves a driver and a car getting me from point A to point B? In that sense, it's exactly the same. That's the product. But I am not interested in product innovation to the extent I'm interested in business model innovation. So here, if I'm twisting at my business model, Uber Eats can generate $6 billion of business in 2019. Boom. And the app, what is Uber doing right now? During COVID, they're saying delivery is free. So they're going to pick up market share because people can't go out to their favorite restaurants. Now, think about this secondary benefit. Many restaurants are going to go under during this COVID crisis, but Uber Eats is throwing out a lifeline to its ecosystem of restaurants by saying, by allowing free delivery for Uber Eats, we're going to help throw you a lifeline when your revenue has been crushed. So not only is Uber Eats going to pick up market share because it has an app and because it's engaged in digital transformation before the crisis, it's throwing out a lifeline to its ecosystem of partners. You know, if Uber can deliver people, if it can deliver burgers, can it deliver manila envelopes and bankers boxes? Let's call that Uber Courier. How about Uber Pet, right? You're at work and you want someone to walk your dog. Well, Uber Pet will pick up this is actually operating in certain test markets. Or who said you ever wanted to go to the veterinarian and sit in the wait room for an hour and a half with your dog, you know, Fluffy or Buffy, the cat? You know, no, Uber Eats, Uber Pet, don't eat your pets. That's what I'm saying. Uber Pet will come pick up your pet, take it to the vet. The vet, you know, phones you to give you your options, and then Uber Pet brings it back. What about Uber Weed? You know, Uber Liquor or Uber Weed. Those would be popular services in Canada during COVID-19. You know, if I'm focused on twisting at my business model level, boom, all sorts of different opportunities are available. I'm just going to touch on business process innovation for just one example. In the 1990s, it took on average 8 weeks to get your check in the mail after you had a car accident. 8 weeks, okay? Lemonade is an app-only based insurance app, started in New York. They have the fastest claims adjustment in world history, 3 seconds. So kid had his parka stolen, answered all the questions on the app, which you can do by voice, the claims bot, you know, took a picture of the police report about his stolen parka, hit the submit button, and 3 seconds later, his claim was approved. So how are we using technology to improve our business processes? So going from an 8-week claim settlement to 3 seconds, what is that in terms of improvement? So those are the two areas that we're going to talk about. I'm really going to argue today that a crisis is a terrible thing to waste. We are having a huge global crisis, and what benefit are we going to get out of this? What mindsets are we going to let go as a result of this? What barriers are we going to break in order to allow for telemedicine or allow employees to work from home? So these are the skills that the World Economic Forum identified as being absolutely essential going forward. Analytical thinking and innovation, learning, creativity. I'll only focus on these top 3. How are we going to take this crisis that we're experiencing to accelerate these skills? How are we going to use distance learning during the COVID crisis to give people courses on learning and creativity? Do what we're doing today with this tech webinar. This is absolutely essential. And the World Economic Forum said by 2022, everyone will need an extra 101 days of learning. That's in addition to what you already do. This was a 5-year study. So 20 days a year of more learning. Is your company engaging in 20 days of learning per person more? Because if we're living in a rapidly changing environment, this is very important. We're going to go to a breakout exercise here shortly. Innovation is essential. CEOs, this is a survey of CEOs by Leger and the Globe and Mail. 88% of CEOs say innovation is essential to their top line and their profitability, bottom line. I don't know what the other 12 were thinking on the day they answered this survey, but here's the killer. At the very bottom, only 22% of companies have a formal process of innovation. Imagine if we said that about sales. 88% of CEOs say sales are essential, and only 22% of companies have salespeople. Only 22% of companies have a sales process. Only 22% of companies have a CRM or other sales tools like Salesforce. Only 22% of companies tie performance, on a quarterly or annual basis to compensation for salespeople. The other roughly 80% of companies hope that sales are just going to organically, magically fall off the tree like an apple with Newton. That would be ludicrous, and that's what companies are doing with innovation. What is the formal system and structure you have to drive innovation? What is the training that you give to every single person to drive innovation in your company and your culture? And the most significant sources of new innovative ideas, surprise, surprise, are employees. That's why it's essential to engage people. Partners second, customers third. So we're going to do a poll, and Ruth Ann is going to bring the poll up for every single person. The question is, how much will your business have to change to thrive going forward? And I'm going to pick a time frame of 5 years. So if your company is going to survive COVID and thrive going forward, how much will have to change in the next 5 years? 20%, 40, 60, 80, 100. So Ruth Ann, is the poll up?
Yeah, the poll is up and people are weighing in. We've got about 50% of people. While they're finishing off there, I'm just going to ask you, Jim, Mark put in a question about, some of these innovations were in process, and now with COVID-19, much of this has been expedited. What do you just want to talk about? What are some of the expediting factors that can move some of these things while we're waiting here?
So the first thing I'd say is mindset. And that's the example we had of Jeff in Altameda. Jeff would never have sought to consult with his millennials or explore other options if his mindset hadn't changed first, okay? So the mindset of many boomer leaders had been before this crisis that you have to come into work to work, because that's what they learned when they were young and grew up and rose through the ranks of their companies. So it takes a different experience to shatter my mindset, whether that's a tech webinar like we're doing today or COVID crisis. So mindset would be the first thing. And then you need to think widely. So I don't think, who's closest to the future? 65-year-old CEO who has his assistant print out all his emails, or the 18-year-old who's on Tinder? Who does all the strategic planning? Who's most disenfranchised from strategic planning? Is it any wonder we only get incremental change? In other words, what I'm really saying, Ruth Ann, is I should not be the one who designs the app for your company, because I don't even know on Tinder whether you should swipe right or swipe left. Which is it, Ruth Ann?
No, not going to go there with you, but we have the results of the poll.
Okay, let's go to the poll.
So 6% of people said 20% would 20% change. 26% said 40%. 42% of participants said 60% of their business is going to have to change. No, 21% said 80, and only 6% said 100%.
So that's a pretty even distribution that's going to basically average out to the middle of 60%. So think about 60% of everything in your company changing. 60% of the systems, 60% of the products you have, 60% of the business models, 60% of the processes. Like, we're really talking about wholesale transformation going forward. You know, we need to think about what do we need to do differently in our business. And we're not going to answer this question right now, but I want to leave this with you. We're not ending the seminar yet. This is what we really need to reflect on as a result of our seminar today. The last area I want to talk about, and we have 7 more minutes till we finish, is personal. So VUCA is a term for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And we are living in times of VUCA. And this stresses many people out to the max because, well, we'll get into it. When I am stressed, I will move into one of these 4 stages: fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. And the fawn bit is like, I am completely powerless. I'm going to wait for the government to save me, right? So when we're in any of these 4 states, we cannot be innovative and creative. We are being overwhelmed emotionally, which shuts down all our ability to innovate and to be creative. So we have to personally move through these stages. We have to help our people move through them. So how do we have empathy? We need to involve people. We need to tell people in our company we're worried about you. We want to make sure that you're okay. One of the things in my company we did, I knew way back in late February that about 70% of my revenue is speaking at conferences and seminars all around the world. And I knew that was going to collapse, and it has. So I knew that our biggest revenue generator for our company was going to move, dangerously close to, well, it's down by more than 70%. So I went out to everyone in the company and said, look, our revenue is going to plummet by 70% or more. What can we do to pivot? What can we do to cut costs? What is the minimum that you need to get by? And some people came back and said, well, I was only working 2 days a week for you. I had another job. The EI has kicked in from the other job. My husband still has his job. So I can get by on 0. Somebody else said I need 15 hours a week. Somebody else said I need 500 a month. So we figured out what everybody needed, and that's what we implemented immediately. In other words, people weren't scared because they had been involved in the process, and it wasn't across the board decision. It was tailored to each single individual. This breaks my heart. Over half of Canadians are $200 or less away from not being able to pay the bills. This is the amount of financial cushion that half of, or more than half of, Canadians have. So this is really how, as a company, can we help our people through this very difficult time. Communication is important, and I think companies need to be in communication, in contact with their people. And one of the principles I learned from Stephen Covey is no involvement equals no commitment. That's why we involve people in that process of how do we pivot, how do we cut costs in our company. The final thing is I want to suggest that you take care of yourself. This is a great book by Dean Ornish, where he's shown the majority of disease we have are caused by these 5 things: not moving enough, physical exercise, having too much stress, not being engaged in loving relationships or supportive relationships, not eating well, and the final thing isn't on the cover of the book, which is sleeping. If I do these 5 things, stress less, love, eat well, move more, and sleep well, that will help me more than anything else in terms of my personal health. And tech is very concerned on personal health. How do we take this crisis and eliminate 25% of what we used to do? Like, what are the non-value added things I used to do personally? What are you going to drop as a result of this crisis? What is your company going to drop? Now, if you're the CEO, you may still have to do something, but you don't have to do it. You could delegate it. You could automate it. That's like the broker question we had. I still have to know the name and SIN number and policy VIN numbers of vehicles that are covered, but why can't we automate this? So I want to remind you that if you want the article, we'll send it to you digitally. Connect with me on LinkedIn or send me an email at jim@jimharris.com. If you can think of a seminar or a webinar like this where you feel I could add value, please let me know by emailing me, jim@jimharris.com. You can help us out, given that revenue from my core engine has dropped by more than 70%. So if you feel there's some virtual event that I could add value, a paid event preferably, let me know. And I want to thank Tech for organizing this. It is an amazing service, not just to Tech members, but to all Canadians that Tech is doing this. So if you've enjoyed this webinar, let other people know about the other webinars that Tech is putting on. They're putting on one every single day. It's absolutely amazing. So I want to thank Ruth Ann for facilitating today's session. I want to thank our technical expert, Andre, and I want to thank all of you for participating and for your questions. And I'll turn it back to Ruth Ann.
Thanks very much, Jim. And I'm really glad you touched on the personal part, because there was a few questions that came in, one from Javier and one from Georgina, again, about, in this idea about technology, where are people in this? So I think that you have addressed that very nicely. And it's really great too that you brought up about sleep. We have Jackie Roberge is coming up on May the 4th, and she is a sleep expert from McGill, who's going to talk about how important sleep is, not just getting some rest, but for learning and for repair and many other aspects. So here's the lineup of speakers that are coming up for up and coming webinars. I really encourage everyone to dive in and to send these out to everyone that you know. Someone's going to find value in these sessions, and you just don't know who that's going to be. So send it out to your colleagues, your associates, etc. All of the recordings are available on our Tech Canada website. Hey, Jim, nice to see you there. And so you can go to techcanada.com, click on COVID-19 Insights tab, the yellow tab at the top, and the recordings for today's session and all of the others will be there to share with your friends and colleagues. So with that, thank you, everyone, and we'll see you tomorrow with Dr. Eve Masita. Take care, Jim.
Bye-bye.